Paramahansa Yogananda, saints of every religion, humbly we bow to you all. Bless us with your living presence, that in our sharing today, we feel the God in each one of us, reflected in our thoughts and words, and that our time together brings us closer to thee. I recited, almost all of you know all the names of the masters of the spiritual path that I follow, but nothing sectarian intended. Just, I need them on my side. I'm going to be speaking today. So, there's no agenda. I'm just here to have your company and, if possible, to answer any questions that you might have. I have no prepared speech, so just whatever you might like to ask, we can just start riffing on it and have as much of a two-way conversation as we care to have. My voice isn't enormous, but I'll do my best to be heard, so if you have trouble hearing me, move closer or go like that. I'm used to having a microphone, so I'm spoiled. Yes, right away, there we have it.
Asha, what I'm interested in...
Wait, pause. Tons of food and tea and coffee over here. You won't be considered rude if it looks more attractive to you than this. Go ahead now. Yes, go ahead.
What ideas do you have about what community looks like as we expand and open to people who have their own centers and we share from our own center? How does it look in that diversity? I'm wanting to find center.
Will you mind if I go there? You sit here.
This is a dilemma. You know, the balance between focus and expansion, the balance between commitment and inclusiveness. So, Yogananda said to Swami Kriyananda at a very critical point, you have to be practical in your idealism. We also have to be realistic about our own abilities. And so all of those factors come into play. And the thing about community is that it always involves people, which is the obstacle to community. At a particular juncture, the community I'm in now, in Palo Alto, I do not remember what prompted this. I only remember the result. My friend Gary McSweeney, who's been my friend forever, and he was the manager at the time. I think it was after Diva, you guys had moved on, but I loved everything about community except the other people. So he was the manager. So actually, I remember I made a little chart. And the idea was that everybody would just stay in their apartments. And then when we needed them, we would open their apartments and they could come out, you know, and then we would have community and then we'd put them all back in. Gary pointed out to me that there was a model for that. It was called prison. Now, of course, I wasn't serious. I wasn't really proposing that. But that is the whole thing about community, is that you have to grow. You don't get to just come in, this is who I am, I get to be myself, you adjust to me. And that's sort of how we live our lives when we're not trying to grow. And we become so convinced of so many things that are wrong. And I don't mean in any way to cast aspersions to anything that anybody said, but yesterday the word safe came up repeatedly. And safe is an interesting word. And at various times in the course of Ananda's 5-decade history, of which I've been part of, there has been an uprising from the bottom of that somebody was doing something wrong because not everybody felt safe. And I actually, after a while, because I'm a wordsmith, had to say, no, actually, you should feel in great jeopardy all the time you're in community, because you should always be in a process of trying to expand and go beyond what you already know. So if you're really looking for a community where you can just, kind of hunker down like a barnacle on the ship and just stay there and have nothing threaten you, don't do it. Because if the community is working, you will always be growing. And the weird way our minds work is that we pray every day to grow, and then when it actually begins to happen, we feel that we're being tortured, or that somebody's out to get us. And 3/4 of the spiritual path is just to realize, no, actually it's working. It's not that it's not working, it is working. So it's your divine self that should feel safe. And your limited self, I don't mean that you should suffer. You understand I'm being somewhat facetious here, because if we're too miserable, it's not working either. But the balance point between what I'm committed to and what you're committed to, and when the two of them don't exactly correspond, Krishna hates onions, Krishna doesn't care about onions, things like that, the human mind begins to grip them. So it just takes tremendous maturity. When Swamiji wrote his book, Education for Life, he said the goal of education, this is for children, the goal of education is true maturity. True maturity is the ability to relate to realities other than your own. And of course the goal of life is true maturity. So if you can relate to realities other than your own, then you can figure out how to adjust. And sometimes the way you adjust is you stand quietly in your own truth. And sometimes you have to try to communicate. And sometimes, I mean, yesterday, I laughed at it later when Diva said that he and I have known each other for 40 years. I was being inappropriately humorous. But I said to Diva, and we've never had a falling out in these 40 years, have we? And I thought for a moment, I said, no, we actually haven't. Whereas many of my 40 and 50-year-old friends, well, there was the period of the 7 years when we didn't talk to each other, and then we got over it, and we went on. So the friendships that I have, which are lifelong, many of them, I have to use the phrase hard won. Some of them are hard won. But it's not the ease with which you become friends, it's the depth in it. And sometimes that, where it's just karma hits, and you have a problem, but you don't run away, and you stick with it. So I don't know if that's an answer, but that's an experience. That's like Michael's nodding, he knows, Those of us who've done it know. You love each other even when you don't like each other. I had a very difficult karma with a woman who arrived at Ananda Village. She actually literally came for the first time on the same day that I came in 1970. And we took us years to really get to be friends. But at a very weird point, when she was my least favorite human on the planet, I also realized that in some very deep way she was my best friend. I just didn't like her. Which is the weird thing that happens. Because what you love is the divine in each other. And if you're really lucky, you like the personality too. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well said.
Okay. Other comments, other questions or comments? Terry?
Yesterday you said something like you used to be kind of pessimistic and now you feel positive.
Point 6, just speak a little slower.
Yesterday you said something like you were feeling pessimistic, now you feel positive. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, I felt pessimistic because I can read, and I can listen to the music, so-called music. I can see the titles of the movies. I can hear, our society is going to hell in a handbasket about as fast as you can go there. We are living in disintegrating times because, as Master talked about it, this is an ascending age. This is Dwapara Yuga. Many of you are familiar with this. If you're not deeply familiar with it, there's a book. It's called The Yugas. It's written by two authors, Selby and Steinmetz, friends of mine. And this this is written in Autobiography of a Yogi about these long cycles of the yugas where the planet becomes, this is an astronomical phenomenon where let's see, how do we move to the center? Our solar system moves to the center of our galaxy where the energy increases and then it moves away from it. It's in an elliptical orbit. So it's a physical phenomenon, it's not a spiritual one. It's a 24,000 year cycle. And this is ancient wisdom, this is not the gospel according to me. And as we move closer to the center, the vitality of the planet and the consciousness of the planet rises. It peaks and then the orbit begins to take us away. This is the explanation of the evidence of advanced civilizations that are incomprehensible to us because we've been in a descending cycle, which was the nadir was 500 AD. Then we're in an ascending cycle here on this side, shifting at 1700s, shifting completely at 1900. And that explains, I'm taking the trouble. There's a few philosophical points that are indispensable to living on this planet in other than a state of panic. And the yugas is one of them. And so we're moving out of an age of matter and form into an age of energy. And we are in a state of tremendous conflict. And that's what I was talking about last night, where the world is going like into a dumbbell, where there's this tremendous negativity and positivity, and each are getting more extreme. Because just in the cosmic way, the forces that are holding on to matter as the reality, and dogma and sectarianism and religious bigotry and racial discrimination, all of those things are just gripping it with both hands. And on the other side is this extraordinary unification, expansion, technological advancement, spiritual awakening, and the two forces are just at war. And we come to a planet, we're in the astral world, and when our karma gets, this is all the world that I live in, but you came to hear me, so I'll talk like I talk. Reincarnation karma, I can't make the world work without it. So we're in the astral world between our incarnations, the karma in our chakras, the vrittis, we get restless. You know, this is how I imagined it, and I'm just imagining it. You know, have you ever gone home, like, come home from work and you say, I have no plans for tonight, you know, I'm gonna do an hour of yoga postures, then I'm gonna meditate for a long time, then I'm gonna listen to a really good talk, and then I'm gonna have a light fruit supper, right? And then about 5:30, you've done a few yoga postures, and you think that, yes, I'm awfully hungry today, and it was a really big day at work, and pizza would be really good, and I could get it and just put it in the freezer, you know, put it in the oven and all. And then so you go to the pizza parlor to get it, and you run into an old friend, and then you're off to a movie, and then about 2 in the morning, you remember that you had another plan. I think we're in the astral world. Everything's just really great. We're having a wonderful time with all the ones who live on that side, and then this slight longing for pizza comes. And then pretty soon you're waking up in a baby's body. There you are again. and you don't really quite remember how you got there, but something took you into that spot. Well, on a more intelligent level, we have guardian angels, we have masters, however our world works, whoever you're with on that side. And we have unfinished, unlearned lessons. That's what karma is. It's just something we haven't yet learned about the nature of happiness and suffering. And so we basically survey, Master said, Yogananda said that there's countless inhabited planets. And we just survey the universe for a planet that's going to have the right vibration for our experience. And some of us came because we're part of building the new. Community is right in the middle of what Master said, and many have said, Thich Nhat Hanh and others have all said, community is the way we have to go now, because like-minded souls need to be together to amplify their magnetism in order to be able to uplift. And And that's really what we're doing. Plus, in such an alien environment, we have to stick together because we're among the heathen, with all due respect, you know. But the other side of it is, you have to realize that God is completely neutral and He loves us all just the same, which is a really important thing to remember. So He loves His rowdy children as much as He loves His sweet children. And so rowdy children need to destroy things. And so this is a great time to be born if you're a rowdy child, because you get to tear a whole civilization to pieces. So they're all here tearing our civilization to pieces. And that's actually quite fine, because it's not a civilization that should be allowed to last. But tearing a civilization apart is very chaotic. And they're really, really busy. They're doing a really good job of working out their karma, which is to find out that this is not going to make them happy, because they're learning the same lessons we're learning. And it's a great time for us, because we get to contribute to what's going to be left after they're finished. Master's predictions are absolutely grim in terms of how chaotic it will get. I'm going to tell you one more part of this. And then Swamiji at one point said that there were basically 4 tribes, you might call them, tribes of consciousness that are on the planet at the same time now. And all of this assumes, but you can accept it or not, but this is, I've come to know this, feel this is true. Atlantis, the legends of Atlantis, where the civilization got so technological that it got completely out of tune with Mother Earth, and Mother Earth ate the continent. You know, just washed the ocean over it, broke it in half, and sank it to the bottom. Because it was so out of tune, so dissonant. Oh, does that sound a little familiar? It was very dissonant. So those techno people are still here, are here again, and the ones who are still rowdy are separating us more and more from Mother Earth, and the same kind of result will happen. The other group is the people who brought down the civilization of Rome by their incredible selfish hedonism, sensuality, immorality, and they're in charge of politics and entertainment right now. So they're busy doing their thing. These are Mother's rowdy children. And then there are two groups of Indians. East Indians, meaning India primarily, and who are not necessarily born in India. Many of us are here. I remember actually when Diva went to India with us for the first time, he said afterwards, well, I can be more comfortable in America because I know I belong somewhere. That's how we put it. I always remembered you saying that. There is a culture that makes sense to me. And it isn't this one, but there is one. So there's a lot of us who have lots of those incarnations who are in the West, because the West is where it's happening. And then the other group of Indians is the Native Americans, from the golden age of the Native Americans, not so much from the dying remnant, which is all that history remembers. That dying remnant knew that the golden age of the people was behind them. Those are all those, well, just speaking of this country. The Romans and the Atlanteans can see each other. The Indians can see everybody, but the Romans and the Atlanteans can't see us. Because we're not gorgeous, we're not powerful, we're not rich. But when they finish bringing it down in the same way that they brought it down before, the ones of them who are left will be astonished to see us, because they don't even know we're here. But we are, and this is what I was saying last night, we are so much more organized and so much more integrated than anybody really knows. Not because we're organized, but because we're in tune with the same things. So when that shift takes place, it'll be our turn. Now, that's one of the reasons I'm optimistic, and the other is this. Everything that happens on the material plane is the last expression of energy, of ideas. Just in your own life, think about it. First you think about something, then you put energy into it, then it manifests, right? it doesn't just show up in the material world. First there has to be an idea, then there's an application of energy, then it manifests. This is the causal, the astral, and the material world. So we're all working on the thoughts, and we're putting energy into this new way of living, and then it's only begun to manifest. But all the power of manifestation is being built. And the ones who are in power are actually at the end of their game. And we're just at the beginning of ours. So I see in so many ways, and I know again last night when Michael talked about the Cloud Appreciation Society, I know it's a very small example, but there's countless examples of where people are just feeling something much better. And the fact that many of those are still just ideas or the energy's just to be beginning, but we're the future. We're just as simple as that. We're building a future that is not quite yet, but we were born for this phase of it. You know, I have friends who are in their 20s, and I can imagine by the time they reach my age, they will have watched the shift as much as I've watched it since I was their age. And we're just like, we're in a cosmic game here, in which we're all just little players, but there are lots of us, and we're doing our job really well. We're doing our job really, really well. And I just woke up one day and realized, to answer your question, I said, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of appalling stuff going on in this world. However, this world is never meant to be perfect. It's just not going to be. This is what I say. This is early Dwapara Yuga. War exists all the way through Dwapara Yuga. War exists into Treta Yuga, which is the one that comes after it. When I finally got that in my head, I realized, oh, so this is not a golden age. But what is the result of that, of the world we live in now? I think the incentive for personal change, the incentive for inner realization, the incentive to be strong inside, it's really powerful. So is it bad to be born in a time like this? This is the great dilemma. If God really exists and if God really loves us, you know, everything has to be a result of that love, doesn't it? And if we're really here because it's our karma to be here, then this must be good for me. We think the word good means easy and pleasurable. That's a serious mistake. I don't know if you ask your little phone what it'll tell you, but don't, because it don't know. Siri doesn't know. Good is that which makes you free of all of the ups and downs. And you know, the mess that this world is in is a tremendous incentive for God realization. And Swamiji had a beautiful way of saying it that I've remembered. He said whenever he sees somebody who's really suffering, he thinks of them, how much greater will be their joy when they finally awaken to God's love within. And isn't that true? The more we've suffered, the more we treasure when grace descends. So here we are. Good question. Any other questions? If you don't ask questions, it'll be a very short session. We've all come a long way, so, okay.
I got a lot to say, but I'll try to keep it focused. Let's start with the tribes. What about the Native American four tribes?
You mean now?
And the prophecies of the Native Americans?
Well, you know,
How do they relate to your
if
tribes?
you look at all the prophets, all the saints, all the masters, when Yogananda started talking, and well, Swami Kriyananda spoke of it in the 1940s. I don't know when Yogananda started saying it, but they all align. They all say it from a different angle, but I mean, you can read, you know, the economic forecast now, 50 years ago, when a lot of this was starting, nobody was saying it as much, but now everybody's saying, we're gonna run out of water, we're gonna run out of air, we're gonna blow each other up with nuclear bombs, California will become uninhabitable, or what the Native Americans say, which I am not deeply familiar with, but it all goes, and then many of them write a much brighter future. Mother Mary in Medjugorje spoke like that. She told everyone to meditate or pray 3 hours a day, spoke of 10 cataclysms, one of which has already been mitigated because people have responded to her presence. So they're all saying the same thing, however they state it. And I don't think you need prophets or ancient peoples anymore. You just have to look around. It's unsustainable. So either it's the end of the world, which Swamiji said, from Yogananda said, planets are destroyed for one of two reasons. Either everybody becomes good and there's no point in having one anymore, or everyone becomes so terrible that God just wipes you off and you start over again. But he said that's not what's going to happen to this one. This one's just going to change. But it might be tumultuous while we go through it. So I would say everything I've ever heard is confirming. They all come together.
So what do you think of the concept of we're just spinning tails here, right?
Well,
We're doing a Maya thing here.
I don't.
There's nothing wrong with that.
No, but let me answer you because you asked me, okay? I have a whole cosmology that I have about 2,000 videos on YouTube. And so it takes a little while to explain. Okay, but the cosmology is based on what's called Sanatana Dharma, which is the ancient teaching of India, which has been consistent for 5,000 years, and it is it's the revelation of saints and masters who do not speak as I do from learned knowledge, they speak from perceived knowledge. Now, trust me, I don't care whether you accept this or not.
I accept it for what it is.
But
But just understand what it is.
But this is where I come from, is I have decided to believe these teachers. And I had 45 years of experience with the direct disciple of Yogananda, who answered all my questions to my satisfaction, and I've had 50 years of personal experience which have persuaded me that this is more than just a mind game. Now,
Maya, not Maya. Well said.
no.
There's a really good
But
video.
just a second. But
The one.
I want to stop the conversation with you only because it's nothing I can argue about. It's nothing I can persuade you about, and I have no wish to try. Because either you feel it inside of yourself and it becomes the way you want to run your life, or it doesn't. And I'm not a person who will try to persuade. So if the next thing you're going to say is contradictory to what I said, let's not do it. That's all I'm going to ask. Not that your point
I don't
is...
know. I don't think it's contradictory.
Okay. I'll give you one more round and then I'll give up. Okay.
I just see it as like there's a couple different things happening. Either you're looking for big self-realization, or you're playing Maya and dealing with universes and cosmos and worlds, which is fine. That's great. But if you want self-realization, I don't know if that's what Swami was promoting.
Yogananda, Paramahansa Yogananda.
Then it seems like that would be something to stick to. I don't know.
Okay.
Just throwing that out.
That's fine.
I'm done.
And we'll just agree.
We can continue.
We don't disagree. We're just.
You asked for questions. So.
And I did, and you gave them, and I answered them, and now we'll see what happens next.
There is one
My
really
turn.
good video. It's called The Great Year, and it's done so well. It was done by a disciple of Yogananda, but it lays out the cycle of the yugas.
It's about
And-
Hindus, yeah, that's a very good video.
And it's paralleled exactly with Plato's Great Year.
great. Yeah.
So I recommend watching. It's really mind-opening. It's very scientific. There are scientists that Walter Crittenden actually.
Walter Crittenden, that's his name.
Yes, he was.
So as long as we
really good.
acknowledge we're not talking about self-realization, it's all good, right? Let's just not confuse the two.
Okay,
Well, it's the evolution of humanity on the earth.
okay. Okay, Walter Crittenden's movie about the Ubers is very good. Thank you for reminding me of that. I forget about it. I mean, I lose track of it, but it's a good one. Okay. Next, if you have the nerve. Yes, Chrissy.
I have a hunch that the answer to this has to do with energy and community.
Uh-huh.
So, which is making me step up and ask this question because otherwise it feels selfish, but I hope other people can gain from it. Very quickly, last year I had a job where I worked with people who were basically 50 to 100 years old. And for like the first month that I worked with them, it was a new job and I think I had so much literally to digest that I couldn't really eat. Even on the drive home from work, I didn't listen to music. I just was trying to process everything. I thought because it was a new job and I was trying to take everything in. But I just started another job now working with 6th, 7th, and 8th grade kids. And completely different. By about 10 o'clock in the morning, I am ravenously hungry. And because it has been such a stark difference, I think it has to do with energy of the communities that I was in.
Oh, interesting.
And I'm just pondering how, I'm also amazed at how different it is, and maybe there's other stuff going on, and I'm not asking you to answer that for me personally, but about how we affect each other energetically, and how we can tune into it, how we can, I don't even really know what my question is, but I'm even at the point of trying to form questions about it.
Well, there's a lot of questions in what you ask. Okay, if we go back to the astral world and we decide to reincarnate at a certain time because of certain things, the world that I live in is very different than the world my parents lived in. The world is, everything is accelerating tremendously. If any of these cataclysmic events really begin to express themselves, whether it's climate change or nuclear war or economic whatever, and I know these are not pleasant things to contemplate, anybody who's in the 6th, 7th, or 8th grade is going to have a very different coming of age in adulthood than we will. So their basic vibration is going to be very different. People who are 50 to 100 years old have lived already through the society that they're going to live in. Of course, their flexibility is going to be different, but they would have been a very different vibration from the moment that they came in. So you have chronological age as a factor there, but you also have karmic destiny and therefore fundamental vibration, because age of your physical body makes you behave differently, but your full intelligence and your full consciousness is there from the time you're born. It's not different, it just, you lack language, you lack context, but you're fully yourself from the beginning. You were an old woman or an old man, and then you're a baby. You don't lose all of that, you just say it differently. So the very vibration of those people is going to be very different than these people because they were born for a different reality. And then, of course, you have the fact that at the age of 50, I remember 50, because 50 was when I realized if I was not going to grow old, I had to make it. 50 was the time, I'll keep backing up. I have a personal theory. This is the gospel according to me. This is, nobody said this but me. It's very important. You can tell the difference. This is my soccer drop kick theory of personal evolution. And this is when you're born, God drops the soccer ball, which is you, gives you a really hard kick. And then you sail through the air, and at a certain point, and this is, you're born, you have a childhood, maybe an early adulthood, it's a really good kick, you sail through the air for a long time. At a certain point, you hit the ground, you bounce, then you roll, then at some point you come to a dead stop, right? But you're not dead. It's just like the momentum that just carried you which could be youth or good karma or whatever it is, runs out. And it becomes a question of actual conscious decision. I mean, Terry asked the question about optimism and negativity, where everything has to be a conscious choice, and I'm going to decide which way my life is going to go now. And I hit that when I was 50, and I could feel how easily I could get old. You know, I have a good physical body, but I could still feel how easily I could get old, and I realized that my happiness up to that point had been automatic, because I got a really good drop kick from God when I started. And at that point, I either decided to be happy or I gradually got it. And the majority of people in the world don't have inner tools of how to maintain their magnetism. And so around 50, sometimes they say 40, sometimes it happens when you're 12. It just depends on who you are. You just wait to die. You don't keep growing. So unfortunately, often in large groups of people who are older than, and that the promise of youth has died, then it's a hard fight. You're pulling wagons without wheels after that when you start trying to help people. Everybody can do better than their worst. But the vitality is very different unless it's a very unusual community. The degree to which environment affects our consciousness is tremendous. This is the whole point of community, because otherwise we're swimming in an alien sea without a protective net around us. And we just pick it up. Some of us are more sensitive to what's going on around us, but all of us are affected. Thoughts are universal. I mean, this is an absurd example, and I think the women will understand this. I'm a Nayaswami now, so my fashion choices are quite limited. But prior to that, in my own little way, I loved clothes and jewelry and so on like that. I had a wonderful wardrobe. One of the hardest things about becoming a Nayaswami is that I couldn't wear all that stuff anymore. I mean, the rest of the renunciation didn't mean much to me, and my wardrobe actually did. It took me only 3 days, but it took me 3 days. So I would pay attention sometimes. And I always knew that when the fashions first came out, they were hideous. But then after a while, I would forget they were hideous. And I specifically remember when, for women, I have to look around, these big black shoes became really popular. Just big, ugly combat shoes. I'm a feminine sort of girl, and I thought they were hideous. After about 3 years, I was in some shopping mall. I was with a friend. I picked up a pair of hideous black female shoes, and I said, "These are cute. Why don't you try them on?" And I said, "Whoa!" I mean, it's a silly example, but you can all speak to it. We just get infected unless we're very consciously. Swami Kriyananda talked about it this way. I didn't have a passport till I was 34. Swamiji was born in Romania. He spoke 4 languages by the time he was 10. By the time he crossed the Atlantic every 2 years when he was a child, his parents were American but stationed in Europe. So he was very cosmopolitan and traveled all over. He said that wherever you would go, you would be able often to tell what nationality people were before they spoke. I took his word for it because I hadn't traveled. Now that I have, I actually know what he's saying. He said almost everyone vibrates with the culture they were born into. This is quite apart from the color of the skin or the shape of the eyes. And I discovered it was true. They have to be Germans. Those people could only be Australians. You know, Israelis are usually pretty easy to spot. And then they would speak, and there they were. Except, Swami said, there would always be people you had no idea what their cultural context was, because they were entirely original. They came from their point of origin. And you just could not tell who those people were because they lived apart from the influences. But one of the odd things that happens about community is that you become more and more yourself. Instead of becoming more and more like everyone else, you get closer and closer to your point of origin. And when you get close to your point of origin, that's the definition of originality. And so you become quite delightfully eccentric, which is actually to say delightfully authentic. And contrary to what many people think is I look at other spiritual people and I try to become like them. I try to put on what they're wearing. Whereas in fact, what you do is you look inward and upward, and it grows like a tree, and like a seed rather. It just you nurture that divinity within you, and it comes from the inside out, and then you'll never lose it. If you put it on from the outside, you're always vulnerable. This is partly the question. Remind me of your name, it slipped my mind. Stephanie. Yeah, Stephanie's question. When it's just authentically yourself, you're just authentic. You don't have to think about how should I behave. You just are what you are. So there's no question that the environment, Master even said, environment is stronger than willpower. I was 18, 19 when I read that. I was rebellious and I think the only word is arrogant. And I said, not stronger than my willpower, but I was wrong, completely wrong. That's just the way we're made. We have to pay attention to it. That's why we have to pay attention. What do you bring in? What is your environment like? What kind of music do you listen to? What kind of news do you watch? What kind of friends do you have? Where do you go? What do you do? Because everywhere you are, you're drinking in the vibrations. And it's very, very important. You don't always have freedom to choose, but if you do, you should. Is that in response to what you said?
That's a great response.
Mine's kind of a tangent on that. If you have a spouse who is
If you have a spouse.
in the world and
Well, there you are. And you give birth to children, and they weren't what you expected them to be. One of my friends was having a lot of trouble with her son, and the parents actually went to Swami Kriyananda to talk about their son. And he said to them, he's very clever the way he works with he's passed, but he said to them, well, you know, sometimes you just have to figure that your kid is a lemon. And this was Dirk and Badura with their son, just for those of you who know. You just have to figure that your son's a lemon. And, you know, they just look so horrified. And then he said, but I don't think so. I don't think that's the truth. But he said that on purpose, because why do you think, just because you gave birth to this child, that, you know, you attracted somebody who was going to be like you? It's just like, where did that thought come from? Swamiji's way of describing about parents and children, I know we're talking about spouses, but children, or you're talking about people that you can't get away from, is what we're talking about, is that the parents create the physical vehicle in which the soul can express, through which the soul can express its destiny. But the parents do not create either the soul or its destiny. You just bring the child into the world, and then you facilitate the destiny of that child. So you often find yourself trapped. You know, you've invited, Swami's very unsentimental. You've invited a total stranger into your house for the next 20 years. And there you have it. And if you're lucky, it's a friend. Or maybe you're lucky, you get to grow one way or another. Maybe yes, maybe no. And sometimes you don't know till they grow up. Or you don't know their destiny. You know, we make all these assumptions, including the length of the life of the soul's destiny. We just assume it's going to be something, but we didn't create the destiny. We just facilitated it and served it. And the spouse is just the same. You marry someone in a certain astrological period for the both of you, and then you both shift into something else. Or you become this and they become that. And especially if you're trying to raise children, it's not a small issue. one has to start from the premise that the law of karma is always exactly what it's supposed to be, and there's no such thing as clerical error. That it really is exactly what it's supposed to be. And therefore, there is an unlearned lesson here if there's a challenge involved. But of course, the hard thing to figure out is what is that lesson? And there's no dogma that will tell you. There's no dogma that says you must stick it out. There's no dogma that says you must think about yourself. There's no dogma that says, it's just, what is this bringing out of me? This is how I'm going to think about this, not what is happening to me, but what reaction is this awakening in me? Because that's what the lesson is about. Because different things bring different results out of people. Chronic illness, as an example. For some people, chronic illness is, oh goody, I don't have to put out any energy anymore. I'm sick. And so then we just get to collapse and kind of like take this lifetime off. For others, it's that God is punishing me for being evil. For other, you can just see. So you can't tell just from the it what the lesson is. You have to ask, what challenge is this awakening in me? And then what is the right response for me to this challenge? For some, it's to endure. For others, it's to have the courage to change. For some, it's to be patient. For others, it's to finally speak up. And there you have it. And you have karmic debts. You owe people things that you might not remember, but you just feel that I have to live through this because I owe it to them. And yeah, it would be so much nicer. I actually said this to Swamiji. I said a lot of really dumb things to Swami over the years. I think this is really close to the top. I said to him once, I might have even been crying when I said it, if life weren't so hard, it would be easier. That's what I said to him. And he just like, he didn't even have an aura. He just sat there, his face went completely blank. All his energy just went inside him. And he just sat there in front of me. And he just let that vibrate between us, until I was just mortified. I'm a wordsmith, for heaven's sakes. Blessed damn it. If life weren't so hard, it would be easier. And the point of that is like, what do you mean? But I just thought, it would be easier if it weren't so hard, wouldn't it? But where would that take us? Well, it would be more easy and pleasurable. But where would that take us? You have to know what the goal is, because if you don't know what the goal is, you won't understand any of the stuff that's happening. The goal is freedom and bliss. And everything has to be measured against that. And then you have to be realistic. I remember, again, this was not a stupid thing I said to Swami, but I learned by that point that I needed to be truthful with him. I spent a few years trying to look good, which didn't work very well, because I didn't look good, and I didn't fool him. And after about 2 or 3 years of that, he said something like, "You never fooled me," which was, "Yes, sir, no, sir, of course, anything you say, sir, whatever you want." It was just good. So I became more authentic. He asked me to do something I absolutely couldn't do, and I didn't want to be deceptive. So I said, you asked me to do that, I'm not doing it. I want you to know. He didn't take another breath. Not as long as it took him to breathe in. He said, well, so much for theory, let's deal with reality. And he just made it an alternative suggestion, which I could do. That's how much God cares, really. We twist it up into something so unreasonable. But God just wants us to do our best. And if you're at the end of your rope, you're at the end of your rope. That's just it. You have to be authentic. You can't just paste dogma onto your head and think that you can live it. You can't. And you don't always know what the lesson is. Sometimes the lesson is to say, I'm not this strong. That's all. I'm just not this good. One of Jyotish, with his little son once, his son was fighting with this other little boy. And Jyotish was Swami Kriyananda's successor. He's a very advanced, wonderful man. And he said to his little boy, after the boy calmed down, maybe you should just try to be his friend. He's unhappy. In community, you know more about what's going on. And his little son looked at him, thought like this, and said, Daddy, I don't want to be that good. And that's how I feel sometimes, Master. I don't want to be that good. We're going to have to try another alternative. I would like to be that good, but I'm not. So that's how you have to look at it. I wish there was a rule book. I mean, churches make up rule books. That's what they do because it's too hard. Self-realization is a very hard path. That's why there's so few of us. Because there's no rule book. There just isn't. Master said one thing to one person, another to another. Just depends on where you're standing, which way you're supposed. So, yes.
Asha, all these things are swimming in my head, but I'm trying to make sense out of it. And what it comes down for me is the idea of back to community and the hope that brings to Mother Earth, to all of us, especially as we're going through, coming out of Kali Yuga, going into Dwapara Yuga, and the vibration is raising on the planet, and we're getting help, I believe, and I'd like you to speak more about that too, and also about how, where we are I'm also in a marriage with someone who is very, very different from me, spiritually, in so many ways. But I have found, even though I found my path, is that as I try to be kind, my best self, which just doesn't always work, because I am human. But and as I do my practices, I find that the magnetism might be my vibrations changing, and today, my husband came to see the property, to see the land, and and so I guess what I'm saying is that I'm kind of leaving that door open. I'm not just going to close it because I'm here to be the best I can be. I am here to become self-realized. And I think that, not that I necessarily will, but I'm trying. I'm like a little hamster on a cage, and I'm trying to do this. As we move into, as we're in Vihara, as we're in Yugas, and getting elevated, and I believe getting some help, a lot of help, and I believe the masters are helping us. And also I think about going back to community. I believe it was Swami Kriyananda who wrote a book, The Road Ahead. And it talks about some of these cataclysms or differences, things that are going to be happening in the world. And I'm trying to get to a question here.
Okay, let's hear it.
And I'm trying to formulate a question. The whole idea of coming together as a group in fellowship and working towards elevating ourselves, how will that help the planet? Because during these difficult times, can we help each other to elevate and grow, become more magnetic, and help others who might be struggling too?
Okay.
I don't know.
No, here's something at least I can answer, which might be your question. So let's try it. We have to be careful because there is personal ego and there's also institutional ego. And institutional ego is also not a very good thing. We're here to save the planet. What we're doing is going to make the difference. When I asked Swamiji very early on, what's the purpose of Ananda? He said, to have fun. And that sort of became, I think it was I who asked the question, but that kind of became something that we would always come back to. Then he defined, he said, but you have to understand what we mean by having fun. Having fun is to become more deeply in tune with God and Guru, and then to share that joy with others. Because our concept of fun is very elevated. It's not self-indulgent and so on like that. He said, it's better just to think like that. Because otherwise, among other things, wow, we're responsible for the salvation of the planet. That's a pretty heavy thing to carry. It's also a complete delusion. We are not at all responsible for the planet, Babaji is responsible for the planet, the Himalayan masters are responsible for the planet. We have the opportunity to tune into high vibrations, and we get to do two things at once, which is we get to liberate ourselves from suffering as we gradually get in tune. And one of the ways we liberate ourselves from suffering, because it's liberating to do so, is we get to share with others and see that our faith, our confidence, our joy has a rippling out effect on the people around us. And I really think it's a better idea to kind of leave it there, because if we're only doing it because we're going to save the planet and the planet goes under, then what happens to us? And it's just too much. In Autobiography of a Yogi, I tried to memorize the page number. It's right up here on the right-hand side. It's the paragraph. Jesus, and this is what they say. Jesus appears to the great master Babaji, and the two masters are working for the salvation of the planet. They're very concerned about the influence of Western civilization, which doesn't make us white people feel all that great, but that's what he says. And they're very concerned about racial hatred, about religious bigotry, about suicidal warfare, about excessive materialism, and they have planned the salvation of this age, and they're working on it. Now, that's the level. So what we want to say is, how can I help? And we should definitely think, how can I help? But if we can't start thinking that we're doing it, because it'll make us crazy, because we all know we're completely powerless. I mean, we have madmen all over the planet who are just completely running amok. Does anybody have any influence on any of that? You have to also believe that they're also God's children and that He knows what He's doing. You see, it takes a lot of faith. But this is, again, the world is changed through vibrations. And all of the scriptures and all of the masters say, don't ever underestimate the power of your consciousness to create vibrations that go out to the whole world. I have said to people, when I went to India for the first time, which was in 1986, which was before India opened to foreign corporations. It opened to foreign corporations a couple of years after that, and the whole country changed. But at that point, they were still running on Gandhi trying to keep the country closed. And I saw, and it was the first time I'd been outside of the advanced Western civilization, and I saw people living on the street. I was in this 5-star hotel in Calcutta, and I could look down and I saw the family that lived on the street down there, and I watched them for the 5 days that I was there, half their life. I thought, we could solve all these problems like that. We have all the resources, we have all the wealth, we have all the technology. The reason they aren't solved is because people don't want to solve them. They just don't want to. They don't want to take that responsibility. Oh, the problem is the human heart. And I often say to people, for years I have to say I didn't even vote. Now things are so crazy, I vote a little more often than I used to. But I felt that I was the most politically active person that I knew, because 100% of my focus for all these decades has been to awaken the human heart and to give people what they need and the tools and the inspiration to change consciousness. So, of course, you can't change someone else's consciousness. You can't make someone else's consciousness better than yours is. You can only share what is authentically yours. So this is your question. Do your best in your life. Pray every day. It's a really simple prayer. How can I serve? Just how can I serve? And you know, we think in worldly terms. God thinks in divine terms. He doesn't care whether you're important. I read this little thing that Swami had written recently. Most people are wrong in what they think. He says, if you ever become popular, remember that. I don't know if he said that directly to me or not. I just have it written down. But the point is, you can't uplift if you're not uplifted. Otherwise, you're just dogmatic, trying to impose your egoic-based will on other people. And how is that working out for us, folks? That's what we're doing. It doesn't work. But if you have something, you can give that away everything.
Thank you.
And then every single minute of your life is fun because you always have something useful to do.
Asha, yeah, along that same line, Swami also noted that if everybody lived like Ananda or Polestar lives, most of these problems just simply wouldn't exist.
That's exactly right.
You know, simple living, high thinking.
I think what we're pioneering collectively, everybody in this room is part of it, what we're pioneering is the future. And I mean, if we do stand back, I think what we're doing is very important. But it's better not to think about it, because it just doesn't take you any place you want to go. Just try to be a pretty nice person. See where that'll take you. Yes, Karen.
I was wondering if you could talk about the astral world and what happens, and do we continue learning there?
What I know about the astral world, I speak very confidently about the astral world, and it might be pure hubris, I don't know. I've read books, I've read what Master writes about it, I've heard what Swamiji says. I've always been fascinated. An energy universe. When my mother died, she had Parkinson's and it had gone to her brain. This was 20 years ago. And she was beginning to have seizures, which was really gruesome. And I saw her on Sunday. I flew to Europe and I was with Swami in Assisi. My sister calls me on Tuesday morning and says, Mom died this morning, just like that. I said, good for her, which was that body was really not a good body anymore, and I was really glad she'd gotten out of it. So I asked Swami a few questions, like, will she remember that I'm here? I had a very nice mother. She was very sweet, but I was one of those people who incarnated in a family. My siblings, but with my parents, they were wonderful, but there wasn't a real strong karma like that, because I left home at 18 and found my spiritual path, and I just needed to be able to live my life. So when I say that about my mother, it was just like, now that she's gone, it was a physical relationship. Is it all right if I just let it go? And I asked Swamiji, will she remember? Will she know? Will her feelings be hurt if I just let it go? Because that was a real question to me. He said, at her level of consciousness, it'll be a sort of a vague dream here. So if you just go on with your life, at this point, she'll be fine. In truth, she remembered my father very strongly. Just to talk about life and death. There's three of us, brother and sister and me. My father lived 2 more years. And when he was dying, as it happened, we all three of us went. We were all right next to him when he breathed his last. The next morning, the three of us, who had never said this to each other, all confessed that in those 2 years, every time we thought of our mother, it was very uneasy. We just felt this great uneasiness. As soon as my dad got to the astral world, we all felt my mother completely relaxed. She was so mad at him. 56 years, where are you? Why are you there? And he was a little demented, and I think he got a girlfriend in the care facility, and I'm sure she didn't like that. But in any case, so there is a whole lot of that reality going on. But this is also what Swami said at that time, precisely. Nothing happens when you die. He said it just like that. Nothing happens when you die. And I've heard him say that before. Nothing happens. We have this great thought that somehow we get bonus points just for dying. Like all this karma is going to be erased or something just because we died. It would be like thinking when I get into my pajamas, I'll be closer to God realization than when I was wearing this dress. That is precisely and exactly how much difference there is. It's because we are the vibration in our chakras. We are the accumulated karma in our chakras. And when we shed our physical body, everything about this life is a manifestation of the vibration in our chakras. And all that happens to us when we go to the astral world is that we are, guess what? A manifestation of the vibration of our chakras. We're just not wearing this costume anymore. And the conditions are different. When I went to India in 1986, the conditions were different. When I went to Bora Bora, the conditions were different. I loved it there, you know. Tropical islands are my natural home. So it's not like you don't feel something different. But even there, I was the manifestation of the vibration of my chakras. So in the astral world, the rules are different, but not so different that we cease to be exactly who we are. I think the thing about the astral world that seems to me like the nicest feature is that here we are on a heterogeneous environment. There's a lot of icky people around us now. A lot of mothers' rowdy children just invade our space, may blow us up with nuclear bombs, may take us off to concentration camps, may steal our money. Just a lot of icky people around. The astral world, homogeneous vibration. And if you have had love for God, then you get to be with other people who love God. You get to be with saints and angels, and everything is really beautiful. You see above you higher vibrations than you can reach, but you know they're there, and from where we are, we help others come up to where we are. And so all of that is nice. When my friend Linda was dying, and she was very much into beauty, she made everything beautiful, Swami warned her, you're going to like the astral world so well, because you'll be with lots of angels and it'll all be beautiful. He said, don't, what exactly word did he use? Don't get too comfortable there, he said, because it's not the last stop. It's like you still have to finish whatever you don't know. So, dying itself, being in the astral world, and when my friend Paula died, who died, she was one of the earliest people to die. Died when you were there, when Paula died, yeah. Michael, were you there when Paula died? She died completely consciously, and we had what we called Paula's passing party. She was in the hospital, but they just kind of turned it over to us. There were about 20 of us with her for like 2 or 3 days, day and night. When it came time to die, it was like 2 in the morning, and she woke us all up. She knew she was going to die. She'd had supplemental oxygen. I'm very observant, and we all sort of, it was about midnight. She was getting sleepy. I watched her. She took the oxygen off. She didn't make a deal about it. She just took it off. A couple of hours later, she died about 5 in the morning, so it was a little while later. She woke us up. I remember she threw a Kleenex box at someone. We were just sleeping all over the place. She woke us all up, and she said, this is very hard. You have to help me. And I believe Jyotish was there, if I'm not mistaken, and he started leading us all in chanting Om. And we just started chanting Om with her. I mean, this is community at its best, I have to say. And we started chanting Om with her, and at some point there, she said, God, Christ, Guru. And then she never said another word. And very shortly after that, she stopped breathing. Just like that. I was sitting she was on the bed, I was on the floor right here. Master writes about the concept called an astral wind, which I never understood what that meant. The moment she died, this astral wind came over my head, and I had this feeling of angels, huge. I didn't see them, I don't see things, but I just felt this angels just sweeping over my head. I burst into tears. Paula was a friend of mine, but not, we didn't call each other every day. I said, I had no idea we were so close. It was somehow like the soul connection was just revealed to me in that moment. And I mean, it was glorious, absolutely glorious. Everybody in the room was completely changed. Swami said later, you don't die like that unless you're free. To be able to be so conscious of what she was doing. After that, I said to Swami, I feel like Paula's just following me around, helping me. And truthfully, to this day, when I get into certain kinds of trouble, I pray to her. Because she helped me when she was in her body, she can help me when she's out of it. She was much nicer than me. She was always really nice to everybody. So when I start to get impatient, when she was alive, I used to model myself after her. So I said, Swami, I feel like Paul is just following me around, helping me. Again, he said, of course. Like, why would merely dying break friendship? You know, if she were in Europe, she would still be helping me. I wouldn't be able to see her, but she would be able to help me. So I think we can be very cheerful about it and very real about the permeability of the worlds. And they also say too, Master says this, I love this. If you've meditated at all, if you've uplifted your consciousness at all, I mean, he's not talking just about Kriyaban disciples. Anyone who has raised their energy to a non-physical level and feels the reality of spirit, when the brain begins to die, because that's all that dies is the brain, if you know that you don't need a brain to be unconscious, you can just meld into those non-physical worlds very easily. And this is my favorite line. But those who think that consciousness depends on the brain feel obligated to go unconscious. It's like, oh, I can't possibly be aware because I don't have a brain anymore, so they go to sleep. He said they don't wake up in the astral world. It's just kind of, he used the phrase a gray dream. And they don't wake up until they have another physical body. But that's not us. You know, with us it'll be, and the masters all say they'll come and get us. And we have as many friends on that side. I mean, now I know their names because they used to be here, but we have as many friends on that side. Death, a funeral in the material world is a birthday party in the astral world. A funeral in the astral world is a birthday party in this world. You know, we just have to change our thinking. One more thought on that, which is really becoming relevant. I came to Ananda when I was 24. A whole bunch of my friends came at almost exactly the same age, and they're all heading for the exit, and some of them have already gone through, you know. And it's like, when you pioneer community, and among the things that Michael showed this morning, that Ivor was showing this morning, is it's like, those of us who came young, we pioneered houses, land, farming, food, marriage, babies, education, money, and now we have to finish old age, disease, death. And we have to create the new model. And we were a little clumsy with a lot of that stuff. So we haven't quite figured this one out yet. That's one of the things I love about what Polestar is doing is, you know, there's a real model there for how to make this work, but some of us have to do it. Like the way Paula died was really impressive. My friend Seva died also terrifically. She said, I don't feel very well. She was 86. They called the doctor who just was her neighbor, Dr. Peter. He came in. I know Seva really well. She and I were Siamese twins for like my first 10 years. Dr. Peter walked in the door. Seva's heart stopped and she fell to the ground. I know Seva. She said, oh my gosh, Dr. Peter's here. I better get out of here. And she just fell to the ground. Peter said he tried to revive her for about 15 minutes. I said, Peter, I'm sure Seva would sometimes shake her finger. I'm sure Seva was standing next to her saying, Peter, I'm not coming back. And Peter laughed and said, well, I had to give her a chance. So we gave her a chance and then he let it go. So there's different ways, but we're pioneering it. And I think it's something just to be terribly interested in. I mean, some of you are much younger, but anybody can go at any time, as we all unfortunately know. But especially those of us who are closer to the end than to the beginning. We need to be, we don't want to just once again just like take on what this crazy, completely dysfunctional culture is telling us. We want to really consciously apply everything we've learned and think about what does this really mean? How do I really want to do it? I mean, one of my friends who has children told her children, you know, I love you, you're wonderful, but when I'm dying, I want Asha to make the decisions, you know, and respect that, but it's just like, they're not on this path, she doesn't want them to make the decisions. And they agree. But you know, just a simple thing like that. Who do you want to make decisions? If you're single and but if you have a spouse, if you have children, who do you want to turn it over to? You have to be unafraid. Think about it. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? Yes.
Was there something that happened after Paula's death or Sarah's death that everyone felt in the whole hospital or anything like that?
Oh, in the whole hospital there? Yes, I mean, Paula was conscious of everything that was going on in the hospital. She said there's a woman down the hall, she's very lonely, some of you should go talk to her, take her my flowers. When her oncologist came in, Paula had cancer 3 times. And her oncologist, she was quite young, she must have been 45 or something, in her 40s. Her oncologist came in and she knew, because doctors believe they're in charge of life and death, but she knew her oncologist felt bad because she never took the chemo. And so her doctor came in and she said, Doctor, whatever his name was, she said, you just have to understand, doctor, I'm just not a chemo kind of gal. It's not your fault, I'm just not a chemo kind of gal. And she really just did everything she could to make sure that he didn't feel bad. And she was, and then all the nurses, they, just everyone knew that there was something really special going on in that room. Yeah, was that the question?
I thought it was part of a story where similar to when one attains enlightenment within themselves, 7 generations are uplifted at their family forward and back.
That's wonderful, and I believe it's true, and I'm sure something happened. I don't have that in my mind. David, do you have it in your mind?
No, I think the only thing I know of is that the hospital was overawed at the kind of experience that happened around her passing.
Yeah.
Because they just never seen anything like it.
No. The community support, our happiness. I have this picture of all of us out in the hall at 2 in the morning drinking sodas. Paula was in her room. When I was on holiday in Costa Rica when she went into the hospital, and I lived in Palo Alto, I had to make a decision, do I go north or south? So I called up the hospital room, and her brother, who was also part of Ananda Arjuna, he lives in Assisi. Asha, he says, Paula's dying to talk to you. Then you hear this laughter in the room. No, Paula's not dying, waiting to talk to you. But that, that's like unheard of in hospital. It's just unheard of. Yeah. I was invited, I've been privileged, and I consider it a deep privilege, to be present when maybe a dozen people, maybe a few more than that have died. I was invited, this was one of the oddest ones, I was invited to be there when they turned off the life support of this man who had, he declined very suddenly. He'd been very strong, and then he was going to die. His wife was in our congregation. She invited me to be there. He'd been unconscious. He's going to die at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Tuesday, and she wanted me to be there. So I come in at 3 o'clock, or 2:30. We all know, there's a huge clock on the wall. Tick, tick. He is wide awake. He's got the ventilator thing on, so he can't talk. He's wide awake. His eyes are bright and shiny. He wasn't consciously on the spiritual path, but he was a real yogi. And before he was on the ventilator, had a great run. It's been a great life. It's fine. He's wide awake, fully conscious, and there's no fear in his eyes. So what they do in the hospital is they basically knock you out, and then they take off the ventilator, so that you're unconscious at the time when you stop breathing. I made a small effort to convince them that this man didn't need to be knocked out. He was so there, and I wanted him to be able to speak again, and not a chance. And I realized that what I, as a yogi, and this is exactly to your question, Suzanne, my role in a death scene, if it's not a totally devotee death scene, is to be somebody in the room who's not afraid, who's not freaked out over the whole thing. Yeah. So I just realized I couldn't influence it in any external way. I made a very small effort. door slam. So I just stood there and wasn't afraid. And you know, you have no idea, that's enormous. Think about it, whenever you've been afraid and there's somebody who isn't, how that changes everything. This is our pioneering work. But you can't not be afraid in that situation unless you're not. Yeah. You can't fake that one. You got me on death and dying, which is a subject I love, so what else would you like to talk about?
Well, I'm sorry, I'm not going to deviate from that. But because I worked in senior care for my whole career, and elder care, and worked with people with dementia and nursing homes, etc. And I'm seeing or I'm hearing what you're saying, and I guess my question is too, the responsibility that a community has in caring for its elders, and the wisdom that you're sharing about what you've learned over a lifetime about aging and disability and death and dying, and what a gift that is to the world to actually do this in the right way. That death isn't something to be covered up, death isn't something to be denied, it's something to be embraced and understood. And so, what responsibility does a community really have in the aging of its members to facilitate that process?
Well, I'm going to go back to what I answered somewhere along this line. Community is made up of people. So you can't abstract out of that. There's no such thing as the community. There's just a group of people who have gathered to live together, who have, to a certain extent, depending on how the community is established, have a shared worldview that they're working with. But you can mandate anything you want, but people are just going to do what they feel to do. So what the responsibility we have is the degree to which every individual can open their heart and follow, but you also have to follow your inner calling. You know, and I feel that there's a very undefined area. I mean, Ananda itself is just stepping into it. And you know, we have lots of sentimental ideas, like the young people take care of the old people. When I was a young people, with all due respect, I didn't want to take care of the old people. And that young people are the people who are moving your community forward. And do you want to pull them all out to take care of the people who have already done it? So I think the responsibility we have is the same. We have to have built into our individual way of life the prayer, how can I serve? We have to build into our way of life a creative response to every challenge that says there is a solution here. And I think we have to be very careful not to institutionalize those solutions, because there could be a whole series of decisions that were completely appropriate for the people who made them that are no longer appropriate because the whole world has shifted and it's a different group. And if that group either feels obligated or compelled to try to model. So I think the more we take everything about community as how it helps us all to grow in an uplifted, positive direction, but I want to balance that with, that's why I love what's been set up here, which no Ananda community has set it up this carefully. We're all just scrambling, trying to figure out how to work this out. So there's experience here that says, look, if our architecture reflects our ideals, then our architecture will support our ideals, and we'll be able to express our potential more effectively. And so I wouldn't give it a theoretical answer. I would just say, if we're all in tune, if we've all been working hard our whole lives, we'll know what to do. And I think that we have to emphasize the change of consciousness first, and everything else will follow. Is that the helpful?
Yes.
Asha?
Yes.
On that same note, I think it's worth, maybe you want to address, a lot of people move to community late, assuming that the community will then take care of them, instead of entering into community early when you have a chance to build the relationships that as a byproduct, by extension, gives you the kind of care that would be natural for friendships that have evolved across time. So I think it's what she was also saying. It's not an institution. it's people.
Care for each other.
If there's another urgent question, I'll take it. Otherwise, I'm going to get the musicians back up here and let us have a little music, and then all of this has to be consumed.
I'll make a quick announcement. First, thank you, Asha, for sharing with us. And thank you also, Stephanie, for hosting us.